I cheated with a university classmate during a medical congress in Cancun, but my husband found out through TikTok. He took revenge on my lover, leaving him with serious consequences. My name is Katerina, I am 41 years old, and I am a general practitioner at a medium-sized hospital on the outskirts of Guadalajara. I have been married for 17 years to Rodrigo, a serious and methodical 44-year-old executive who holds a high position in a multinational fertilizer company. Rodrigo has always been the type of man who fulfills the role that society expects: a provider, a present father when he is, and an honest husband. We have 2 children, Mariana, our 14-year-old teenager who inherited her father's observant temperament, and Tiago, 11, who is more affectionate and sensitive. We live in a large house he inherited from his parents in a quiet and peaceful neighborhood. From the outside, our marriage was stable, even admirable. There were no big fights or scandals, but there was also no passion. Rodrigo spent half the month traveling for work, and I divided my time between shifts, meetings, and consultations. It was an exhausting, almost robotic routine. Our meetings became scheduled, formal. The good morning with the aroma of coffee, the good night in the darkness of the bed. We had a functional family, but it lacked a soul. At the hospital, I felt alive. Other doctors respected me, praised me, and even sought me out for delicate cases. I felt that my presence made a difference. At home, however, it was as if I only took up space. Rodrigo barely listened to me when I told him about my day. Sometimes he didn't even feign interest. And no matter how busy I was with the children, appointments, life, there was something inside me that screamed in silence. I first noticed this void at the end of last year when we returned from a family trip to Puebla. While the children laughed in the back seat, I felt a kind of disconnection, as if I were floating above my own life, watching it unfold without really participating. Rodrigo drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road, and I looked at him, wondering, who is that man next to me? There were many times when I tried to rekindle what we once had. I organized dinners, suggested trips alone, left him notes in his suitcase before trips, but the response was always lukewarm. Rodrigo was not cruel, he never cheated on me, he never raised his voice, but he didn't really see me either. It was as if my efforts just hit a concrete wall, and little by little, I stopped trying because the void became more comfortable than the silent rejection. Even in the rare moments when we were alone, without children or commitments, the distance between us seemed insurmountable. The contact was mechanical, the kisses soulless, and I began to wonder if this would be the rest of my life. A fully realized role, a real marriage, 2 healthy children, but a suffocated existence without purpose, without desire, without color. And it was in this state of stupor that I received an invitation to a medical congress in Cancun. The medical congress in Cancun seemed perfect for my emotional escape. A week away by the sea, with doctors from different regions and no domestic commitments. It was everything I needed. When the hospital approved my participation, I felt a strange joy, almost a sense of guilt. I wasn't wearing a ring, not out of rebellion, but because I already felt a little outside the marriage. Landing at that suffocating airport and feeling the salty air invade me was like breathing after a long time underwater. The first night, at a welcome dinner in the hotel restaurant, among new faces and technical conversations, I heard my name called with a familiar tone. When I turned around, there was Gail, 42 years old, an intensivist from Mexico City, a former university classmate. Dark-haired, with slightly wavy hair, a beard, and that provocative air that always disconcerted me. We looked at each other and laughed. We hadn't seen each other in years. Gail had always been intense, direct, with an energy that filled any space. We talked like old friends, but there was something more. The tension between us was palpable, like a stretched rubber band. He remembered stories from university, teased me with subtle irony, and his gaze made my heart beat at a forgotten rhythm. After 2 glasses of wine, we went for a walk on the beach, and he took my hand as if it were a natural thing to do. When he kissed me on the cheek to say goodbye, I felt a shiver all over my body. I returned to my room with my mind racing. The second day, the inevitable happened. We had lunch together, laughed like teenagers, and returned to my room as if guided by something beyond logic. I didn't hesitate for a second. We undressed quickly and eagerly. It was an intense moment, suffocating kisses, intertwined bodies, sweat, and moans muffled by the sheets. We had sex for almost 3 hours before falling asleep. Gail used me in every way, in every position, exhausting me to the last drop of energy. When I woke up in the middle of the night and saw Gail sleeping next to me, I felt at peace, but also dizzy and tired from the treatment he had given me, something I hadn't received in a long time. I knew what I had done, and yet I didn't regret it. Before going to our appointments for the day, Gail used me one more time, as if I were his personal escort. I loved it. I felt desired, used by a man with energy who felt desire for me. I started the day feeling on top of the world, completely satisfied, tired from the intensity of the night, but completely satisfied. For the next 3 days, we repeated the ritual in secret. We attended conferences, exchanged discreet glances in the hallways, and met at sunset. It was something physical, but also emotional. I felt desired, listened to, alive. Gail told me that I was different, that there was a light in me that he didn't remember seeing before, perhaps because it had been extinguished for years. Every touch of his seemed to rekindle parts of me that I didn't even remember existed. The last day, there was a closing party. We danced as if we were the only ones on the floor. We laughed out loud, clinging to each other. Gail whispered words in my ear that gave me goosebumps. At that moment, I forgot everything about Rodrigo, about my children, about my whole life outside. I just wanted more of that. But it was precisely that night, in that moment of carelessness, that fate began to sharpen its claws. Someone filmed it, someone published it, and when I woke up the next day, my world was no longer the same. I woke up on the last day of the conference with a slight headache and my skin still smelling of the sea. The sun flooded the room, and for a few seconds, everything seemed normal. Gail was still sleeping, naked, covered up to his waist. I wanted to smile, to snuggle up there again, but my cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating insistently. When I saw Renata's name, a friend from the hospital, I felt a tightness in my chest. I answered with a still hoarse voice and heard her say dryly, "Katerina, your face is in a video and it's already gone viral." In the video, I was in a moment too intimate to be made public. Gail and I were close, dancing to a slow, almost sensual rhythm. At one point, he kissed my neck and I laughed, throwing my head back. The party lights flickered, but the image was quite clear. The problem wasn't just the kiss, but the context. I was wearing a badge around my neck with the hospital's name visible. The video's caption, "Medical Conference or Reality Show About Infidelity?" In less than 6 hours, it was already in dozens of WhatsApp groups. I hung up the phone with trembling hands, opened my email, and there were messages from the hospital board, from human resources, from colleagues with sarcastic emojis or ambiguous messages. I tried not to panic, but when I checked WhatsApp, I realized that something worse had already happened. Rodrigo had seen my last messages, but he hadn't responded to any of them. When I tried to call, the call went straight to voicemail. And that's when I felt it. That emptiness that I had been carrying for so long was now a real, concrete hole into which I was beginning to fall. I sent Rodrigo a bunch of long messages, short text messages, audio messages. I tried to justify, to lie, to minimize. In one of them, I simply wrote, "Please listen to me." Nothing. No check marks, no signs of life. By reflex, I started crying right there, still in a towel, leaning against the hotel door. Gail tried to get closer, to ask what was wrong, but I pushed him away. "Go," I whispered, trying to maintain my dignity. He left in silence, as if he knew the fantasy was over. I took the first flight back to Guadalajara without even waiting for the official end of the event. The trip to the airport was a blur. My mind replayed scenes from the video over and over. I tried to prepare myself for what awaited me at home. Maybe a furious Rodrigo, maybe shouts, or who knows, a silence that would hurt even more. On the plane, the weight of guilt crushed me. I knew I had crossed a line with no return, but I kept deceiving myself, thinking that with explanations and tears, I could recover what I had destroyed in a few days. Deep down, I was still waiting for Rodrigo's response, for him to say something, anything, to call me a traitor, disgusting, but to speak. The silence was worse. It was as if I no longer existed. I arrived at the airport late in the afternoon. I ordered a transport service directly home. With every kilometer I traveled, my heart beat faster. I clutched the phone tightly, without getting any response. Only when I saw the door of the house approaching did I realize I was not prepared for what awaited me. The first thing that struck me was the silence of the street. It was strange to see my own house, that two-story house with its discreet facade and its well-kept garden, so alien. When I put the key in the lock and it turned without turning, a shiver ran down my spine. I tried again, as if the problem were nervousness. Nothing. I rang the bell and waited, with the suitcase still at my feet. My hands were sweating. When the door opened, there was Rodrigo. White shirt, rolled up sleeves, a stony expression. He looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pain that shattered me inside. "You don't live here anymore," he said with a firm voice, without raising his voice. I was paralyzed. I tried to say something, but my throat was dry. "Rodrigo, please." He pointed with his chin to one side of the house. I turned and saw my suitcases, bags, boxes, all piled up in the garage as if it were abandoned furniture. The gate was already ajar, as if they were waiting for me to enter, grab them, and disappear. I approached the boxes with trembling legs. On top of one of them was an envelope with my documents and the name of the apartment he had rented for me for a month. It was as if he wanted to resolve everything in the most surgical way possible, leaving no room for drama. I returned to the entrance of the house, crying, "Rodrigo, please listen to me." He took a step back without looking at me. "There's nothing more to say. You've already made your decision." His voice trembled, but his eyes remained dry. I tried to get closer, to touch his arm, but he backed away as if I were toxic. I felt a desperate despair, as if I were being torn from my skin. It was a mistake, a failure. I lost myself, but I'm still the mother of our children, Rodrigo. We have a history. He narrowed his eyes as if that word hurt him. History? You threw away every page. And he went inside. The door closed with a dull thud. I stood there, trembling and with a wet face, hearing only the sound of my own crying. I took my things to the travel agency's car with the help of the driver, unable to say a word. As we drove away from the house, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that the living room curtain was swaying. Someone was watching me. Maybe Mariana, maybe Tiago. But no one came. Their silence hurt more than Rodrigo's contempt. My phone remained silent. I looked at the screen as if that could force a message to arrive. Nothing. No explanation, no possibility. Just exile. They erased me from their lives in less than 48 hours. I arrived at my rented apartment in the center with the feeling that something had died inside me. The place was cold, impersonal, like a shabby hotel room. I left the boxes in the living room and sat on the floor, between suitcases and shadows. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly empty. It was no longer just an existential hole, it was the absence of everything. Rodrigo didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't cry. And that was worse than any scandal. Because what he showed me that day was that, for him, I simply ceased to exist. What really destroyed me was not Rodrigo's rejection, but the impact on my children. Mariana and Tiago have always been my center, my anchor, my pride. I deluded myself into thinking that I could protect them from the scandal, that I could explain it to them calmly, carefully, and lovingly. But the internet is relentless. The second day of my return, I received a voicemail from the mother of one of Mariana's classmates. "You should know, your daughter saw the video. They showed it at school." I was paralyzed. I felt the world spinning slowly. Mariana blocked me that same day. I tried to call her and send her messages, but my phone only said not delivered. She was 14 years old, she already knew more than I would have liked, and that video was not easy to digest. According to what I was told later, she left school crying and spent the rest of the afternoon locked in her room. Rodrigo picked her up and took her straight to his parents' house in Tepatitlan. Tiago was different. He called me crying and one weekend insisted on seeing me. Rodrigo gave in, under supervision. When I opened the apartment door and saw that little boy hugging me tightly, I broke down. He cried in my arms and whispered, "Why did you hurt Dad?" I couldn't answer. I could only say, "I'm sorry, my love, I'm sorry." He stayed there for 2 hours, not playing, just leaning against me. Then Rodrigo came to get him. He said nothing, just took his son by the hand and left. Tiago's look as he left was what broke me. As if they were snatching him away from me little by little. The following days were empty and cruel. Their absence resonated in the walls of the apartment. I found myself obsessively checking the social media of Rodrigo's sister, the children's school, any trace that would make me feel close. Mariana didn't respond to my attempts to contact her. When I insisted too much, Rodrigo sent me a message, "Leave her alone. When she wants to talk to you, if she ever does, it will be in her own time." The pain of losing my daughter's trust was something that not even medicine could cure. In the following birthdays, I tried to make up for it with gifts. I sent them to their grandparents' house with handwritten notes. On some occasions, Tiago would respond with drawings. As for Mariana, not even a thank you. Sometimes I would go to the school and stay outside just to see them come in or go out. I never dared to get close. Rodrigo threatened to sue me if I insisted. "You caused them trauma. Don't expose them anymore." That destroyed me. I was the culprit, I knew it, but that didn't stop my maternal instinct from screaming. Little by little, I became an absent figure, a ghost who sometimes sent me memories by mail. Rodrigo cut off all emotional connection between the children and me. Only Tiago, with his sweet heart, continued to fight to maintain contact. But I could see that he was already beginning to avoid getting too attached. It was as if he felt that loving his mother meant betraying his father. And this guilt, sown too soon, distanced him more and more. I could only watch helplessly as everything fell apart in silence. Rodrigo always had a serene and controlled attitude. He never made a fuss, never raised his voice, never lost his tone. But after what happened, something changed. His coldness took on a different nuance. It was a silence that no longer hid pain, but strategy. Rodrigo didn't want to punish me emotionally. He wanted to erase me with surgical precision. And I only understood it when I received a call from a colleague at the hospital who told me, "Be careful, he's digging into your life. Rodrigo has hired someone." At first, I thought it was an exaggeration, but the pieces began to fit together. They printed an old email and attached it to a file that had appeared anonymously in the hospital's ombudsman's office. Archived messages, screenshots, even photos of my personal life that had been saved in a forgotten cloud. Everything was recorded. Later I discovered that he had hired a private investigator in Guadalajara, a meticulous woman who spent weeks tracking my online movements. She had gotten into places I didn't even know existed. My past became ammunition. The first official bomb arrived by certified mail. Rodrigo had filed for divorce, but that wasn't all. The document demanded full custody of the children, exclusive rights to the family home, and pointed out immoral conduct incompatible with responsible motherhood. I read it with trembling hands. I had never felt like a criminal, but in that document, they described me as a risk, as someone unstable, without an emotional structure. Rodrigo had turned my failure into a sentence. I quickly contacted a lawyer, but he was frank. Public opinion is already against you, and with the video, the digital history, and the testimonies he has collected, it's going to be tough. I felt destroyed. I, who had dedicated years to my work, to my home, to my children, was now being painted as a threat. Rodrigo didn't shout, didn't denounce me. He simply collected evidence and buried me with it. It was as if he had become a different person, someone methodical, ruthless, who planned everything in silence. I began to realize that his calmness, which I had always considered a sign of maturity, was now a kind of cruelty. He didn't want me to pay emotionally. He wanted me to disappear. And the worst part, he was succeeding. Every hearing, every new court order, took a part of me. My children began to be seen as possessions, as revenge. Rodrigo said it was for their own good, but his way of acting was based on control, on leaving me without foundation. I tried to have a conversation, however brief, after leaving one of the sessions with the lawyers. I was desperate, imploring for any chance of dialogue. He looked me in the eyes and simply said, "You don't get it. It's not about us anymore. It's about protecting what's left." And he left without looking back. The woman he loved, the mother of his children, was now a problem that had to be solved with protocol and letterhead. And I felt more and more buried. 3 weeks after the last divorce hearing, I received a strange message from an unknown number. "Have you seen what happened to Gail?" My heart stopped. I opened the link. It was a news story from a Mexico City newspaper. Gail had been found unconscious on the floor of his own apartment with fractures to his face, broken ribs, and a serious head injury. The most shocking thing is that he would permanently lose part of his vision in one eye. The article said that the attack seemed to have been premeditated. There were no signs of a break-in, no witnesses. I was in shock. I called the hospital where he worked. He was no longer there. I called mutual acquaintances, but no one knew much. The police were investigating, but the details were scarce. There were no suspects, no nearby cameras that could have recorded anything useful. Everything seemed to have been done with surgical precision, cold, clean, deadly. Deep down, something inside me knew that it hadn't been a random robbery. It was a message, a sentence. For weeks, I was paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. Every noise in the hallway of my building paralyzed me. And the most disturbing thing of all, Rodrigo didn't say a word about what happened. Nothing. Not a single mention. It seemed like he didn't even know. But it was impossible not to connect the dots. The timing, the style, the coldness. Gail had no known enemies, had never been involved in anything dangerous. The only thing he had done was sleep with me. And that was enough to awaken Rodrigo's silent hatred. I tried to contact Gail. I sent emails, messages, and even a letter to the hospital where he was being treated. Nothing. A friend of his told me that he had left the country, that maybe he was in the United States with relatives, but no one knew for sure. It was as if he had been erased. And the most terrifying thing was that, deep down, I understood. Rodrigo was one of those who, when hurt, didn't retaliate with words. He planned, he organized, and when the revenge came, he left no trace. A month later, I received a call from him, the first since he kicked me out of the house. I answered with bated breath. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask about the children. He simply said, "Life has a silent way of restoring balance." And he hung up. I stood there with the phone glued to my ear, trying to decipher if it was a threat, a confession, or just a glimpse into who he had become. His voice was calm. It would have been almost reassuring if it hadn't been so terrifying. From that day on, I never mentioned Gail again, not to the lawyer, not to the therapists, not to myself. It was as if he had been forcibly torn from my story. And worse, if there was anything left in me that thought Rodrigo still looked at me with affection, it died there. The man who had looked at me with admiration years ago now only saw a shame that needed to be buried. And somehow, he did it with an efficiency that justice could never imitate. The scandal of the video did not die in Cancun. It spread, passing through groups of doctors, shifts, and management. When I returned to the hospital, the looks on my face were different. Some reflected pity, others judged me, none were neutral. There were rumors in the hallways, subtle changes in the shift schedules. I started to be left out of meetings, my decisions began to be questioned more frequently. A colleague who used to admire me confessed, "You have no protection here anymore, Katerina." It was then that I realized that my career there was coming to an end. I asked to be transferred to a smaller unit in the interior of Jalisco. The salary was lower, the resources were scarcer, but at least no one knew me yet. I moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment in the center of the new city. It was too quiet. During the day, I immersed myself in work. At night I stared at the ceiling, wondering what Mariana would be thinking or if Tiago still called me mom when he cried. Rodrigo only allowed me to see them on alternate weekends, under supervision. When I met Tiago, he tried to smile, to be the same sweet boy as always. He hugged me tightly, asked me if I was eating well, and brought me drawings from the back. But I felt that something inside him had already broken, a fear, as if he were dividing his soul between his parents, feeling guilty for every gesture. Mariana, on the other hand, was a block of ice. When she saw me, she barely looked up, she answered in monosyllables. She no longer called me mom. She treated me like an unwelcome acquaintance whom she had to put up with. I tried to win them back, little by little. Gifts, handwritten letters, videos with stories from their childhood. Nothing seemed to work. Rodrigo insisted on maintaining the barrier. He told them both that I needed to recover my values, that forgiveness was their decision. And I saw how this indoctrination affected the way they looked at me, spoke to me, and breathed around me. On their birthdays, I would bring them gifts with the foolish hope that they would invite me in. Sometimes Rodrigo wouldn't even open the door. A housekeeper would collect them and say, "They're busy." There was one day, Tiago's 12th birthday, that he saw me from the window. He ran down and hugged me secretly. We stood there in my grandparents' garden without anyone seeing us. He whispered, "I haven't forgotten you." And that sustained me for weeks. But after that day, Rodrigo changed the rules. Now the meetings were held in the lawyer's office, with supervision. They treated me like a distant visitor, not like a mother. It was a farce to keep everything under control, and I was the weakest piece. I began to avoid showing up unannounced. I learned that every failed attempt left me more shattered. I lived for the weekends. When they ended, I would fall apart. The apartment would once again be just four walls. I began to realize that my existence had been reduced from a respected doctor, a present mother, and a stable woman to a solitary, almost unrecognizable figure. And the cruelest thing, even with all the pain, I still thought I deserved it. Because in a way, I myself had caused this fire. I just didn't know that it would burn me to the bone. I started therapy after waking up in the middle of the night feeling breathless, as if my own body were suffocating me. My therapist, Alejandro, was recommended to me by a distant colleague. A quiet man with a deep voice and incisive questions. At first, I just cried. I couldn't form complete sentences. But little by little, I began to dig through the rubble. I discovered that the void that had been eating away at me before the betrayal was never about love or desire or Gale. It was about a lack of purpose. I had erased myself from my mind long before I was punished. Alejandro made me look back without hating myself. He showed me that for years I had been absorbed in a routine that numbed me. My marriage to Rodrigo was a beautiful but empty showcase. My role as a mother was dedicated but blind. I took care of everyone but myself. When I allowed myself to feel something different, even in the worst way, it was a delayed reaction to years of internal abandonment. It didn't justify what I had done, but I was beginning, for the first time, to understand where my fall came from. It was during one of these sessions that Alejandro suggested something difficult, trying a joint session with Rodrigo. Even if it's not to reconcile, it could be a worthy ending. I managed to get Rodrigo to agree. The session was scheduled in a neutral office. When he entered, his gaze was the same as always, cold, impassive, like a marble statue. I tensed up, trembling. I talked about the void, the guilt, the desperation. I talked about how all this had shattered me. He just listened, in absolute silence. When I finished, Alejandro asked if he had anything to say. Rodrigo took a deep breath and said, "You killed my inner self." Those were the only words he uttered, direct, without anger, but sharp as a blade. Then he got up, thanked the therapist, and left. I stood there, unable to cry. It was as if I had been given an emotional death sentence. There would be no forgiveness, no new beginnings. Just this invisible tombstone between us, carved with the decisions I made and the damage I caused. After that session, I stopped trying to get back what I had lost. I began, little by little, to look forward. Not with hope, not yet, but with acceptance. Rodrigo and I were now just names on a piece of paper. We communicated through lawyers, cold appointments, authorized visits. Mariana didn't even want to participate in the mediations. Tiago kept coming, but with more discretion. The family I had now existed in old portraits and in the memory of a time that perhaps had never been as real as I thought. Therapy helped me not to destroy myself completely, but it also showed me something cruel. Not everything can be fixed. Some wounds don't heal, they remain engraved on the skin. I learned that redemption sometimes is not about recovering what was lost, but about not losing yourself again. Rodrigo moved on in his own way. His children grew up under the shadow of the scandal. And I learned to live with the echo of the woman I was, and with the heavy silence of everything that will never be again. A year has passed since the day I came home and was treated like a stranger. Rodrigo now lives with his children at his parents' house, which has been renovated and expanded to better accommodate the three of them. Occasionally, his sister posts photos. Mariana smiling in a park, Tiago playing with a cousin, Rodrigo hugging them both in a restaurant. He looks different, thinner, more focused. His gaze has changed. There is no longer that tiredness. He seems at peace, as if he had left a burden behind. In this case, me. I continue to work at the rural hospital. I have become a reference in humanized patient care. They like me. They say I am reassuring and kind. No one there knows my story. There I am, simply Dr. Katerina, without scandals, without videos, without distant children. But every time I see a mother with her child, I feel a pang in my chest. It is a dry, constant pain, like a reminder that a part of me lives elsewhere, in another house, in other hugs. I write letters to my children in a notebook hidden in my bedside table drawer. One for each special date, one for each absence. I wonder if they will read them someday. When they are adults, if they will be able to separate who I was from what I did, or if they will keep me forever in the past, as the mistake that destroyed our family. Mariana has not responded to me in months. Tiago responds with short emojis. Sometimes when I see him, he hugs me with his eyes closed, as if he wanted to escape reality for a few seconds. Rodrigo does not directly forbid me from seeing them, that would be frowned upon in court, but he has made everything more difficult, more formal, more disconnected. I know he does it to protect them both, and a part of me understands. A part of me still loves him, or at least loves the man he was before all this. But that no longer matters. What we have today is silence, exchange of documents, cold decisions, and no shared memories. Our story has become a file that no one wants to open anymore. Sometimes I dream of Gail, other times I come across reality. I found out from a reliable source that he returned to Mexico months ago, but he is far from being the same. The consequences of the attack were profound: partial loss of vision, head trauma, emotional instability. They say he lives in isolation, without working, with recurring anxiety attacks. He can no longer practice medicine as before. The vibrant energy that seduced me has been replaced by a shadow. Like me, he pays the price for what happened. Only is silent, lonely, and permanent. We are two pieces of a shipwreck that collided and sank together. He for what he lived through, I for what I caused. I survive. It is not redemption or victory, it is just that, survival. One day after another, trying to do the minimum possible good to compensate for the bad I left behind. Sometimes I smile for real, other times I smile to hide it. But I keep going because I have no choice, because of all the voices I have stopped hearing. The cruelest is the one that screams inside me when I look in the mirror, and it never shuts up.